Well, to start off, I want you guys to imagine with me that you are part of a group of people from very diverse backgrounds. Okay, so just imagine this very diverse group of people. Maybe it's 8 to 12 people, okay? And male and female. And you have to, among that group, choose a leader for the group. All right, so this is open discussion here. If you were part of a group and you had to choose a leader, what do you think are the things that would happen that would allow you to choose, or what do you think are the things that you would go through to choose that leader as a group? So Lee, things you'd look for.
In the book of Timothy, it's Paul, I think, is writing to Timothy about what makes a good man when you're looking for a leader.
Yeah.
And he mentions that a good man is not given to wine or hard drink.
Yes, very good. So certain characteristics of character, would you say?
Yes.
So somebody that, has kind of a certain level of character, morals and that kind of thing. What else? Not necessarily what you would look at, even, but what do people look at when they're picking a group leader?
You want someone who's willing. It would be somebody who really wants to do it.
That's a good point. Have you ever been part of a group where it was everybody just sat there well, I'm not going to do it? So, confidence, absolutely. Experience, you bet. That's a good one. Yeah. So talking about these two, so confidence. There are people that kind of carry about this natural leadership or this natural charisma, right? And I don't know, I've seen in groups where that person just naturally becomes everybody's pointing to that person, even if they're not necessarily, but there's this something in them that people feel they feel confident because of the confidence of that leader, right? And then you said experience. So a lot of times, when you're in a group, there's specific needs that need to be done if there's leadership that's needed. And so you would look to somebody who has been there before, right? That maybe they've had leadership experience, or they have the skills and the abilities, right, to do the job that needs to get done. So, those are very good ones. Anything else that comes to your mind?
A leader has to motivate people.
Yeah, absolutely. So you might pick the person that you think would be the one that could round people up and inspire the people. And I would maybe call that somebody that has a certain charisma, right? They're just people that whether they should be a leader or not, whether they have the character or not, they at least have this aura of leadership about them, for lack of a better word. This aura of leadership that just makes people go, oh, I could follow this person. And so, there's a certain level of respect there. So those are good. Those are really good things. Does anybody have anything else? Those are the ones I had kind of thought of too.
Observing how they react in times of distress.
Oh, for sure. So if the group knows that this person has been able to see kind of some of their decision making, how they've responded to really difficult situations, because obviously if someone is able to keep cool-headed, make good decisions even when the pressure is on, that's somebody that can be trusted to lead your group, right? So that's very good. So we're talking about leadership right now, and talking about leadership lessons and kind of leadership lessons I know I'm still learning, because I think leadership is one of those things that we never stop growing in. And we're talking about it for a few reasons, other than the fact that I felt like God told me this is what we need to talk about. But first of all, it's because God's church needs leaders, right? We need people anytime big things need to get done, there has to be vision, right? And vision requires leadership to drive that vision. And we're working on that right now, actually, kind of behind the scenes. Cheryl and I are actually getting together this week to talk through some visionary things for Vineyard. And we're getting ready. We're kind of doing alpha right now, but kind of post-alpha, what we're looking at is where are we going as a church for Vineyard? And we're going to be driving some things forward with that I'm really super, super excited about. And many of you will be a part of that, have been and will be. Second of all, is that God's people, I believe, are called to leadership in some capacity. All of us who are called followers of Jesus are compelled to lead. And that's because we are God's ambassadors, we are kingdom promoters, and we are servants of Jesus. And just by that nature, we follow our leader who was an influencer. And we know that he has given us the ability to influence others as well for the sake of the kingdom. And that's a pretty grand influence if you think about it, you know? Now, all believers, all of us are called to influence, but not all believers are called to influence in the same capacity, right? And that's what I kind of want to talk about today. Because last week we talked about all of us are leaders, and leaders are really what? Do you remember last week? This is the test. Servants. Yeah, servants. Well, host is a good word, though. I mean, because a host is by its very nature a servant, right?
Don't try
so
to make
absolutely,
you feel good.
I am trying to make. I'm trying to make you feel good, Cheryl. No, no, it really is. Like a host is a servant. But thank you, servants. We are all called to serve and to lead through our service. But even though all of us are leaders, there are specific leadership callings that are needed in the church, right? And some of Paul's letters, as Lee mentioned, are instructions to young leaders about building churches. I mean, that's really, when he was writing to Timothy, and I believe it was to Titus, Timothy was a young leader who needed guidance from his mentor on how to lead people to lead churches, right? And so we look, and he wrote to Timothy about two specific positions. One of those is overseers, and the other is deacons. Okay, two specific kind of positions that he mentioned. And I'm not going to go into those right now. I think those are probably good things to talk about at some point. But I will just say this, that in Hebrews mentions that the leaders in the church, their role is to, quote, keep watch over us. To keep watch over us. The role of leaders in the church is to protect and to guide and to instruct and help us all to go down the path that God has for us individually and as a group together. That is the role of leadership, I believe, in the church. Then we have the specific calls that Paul highlights. The certain giftings that are necessary for the church as a whole. And you guys are probably very familiar with these, but let me just kind of highlight them a little bit. We call them the fivefold ministry, right? One of those is the apostolic gifting. And apostles, I think this is the one that's the most confusing for people, because they're like, what's an apostle? Everybody kind of understands the concept of a pastor, because that's what we title everybody that leads a church. They're a pastor, they're a pastor, they're a pastor, right? Even if they don't necessarily have a pastoral gifting, okay? We call them a pastor. It's, tradition. But the apostolic gifting, first of all, is they're starters. They're the ones that can come and light the fire where it needs to be lit. An apostolic gifting, somebody with this gifting can start something where there is nothing. Okay, and you can see how that would be pretty important in the church. I'll tell you what I see overall in the church is we have a lot of churches, and I'm talking broad scope here, but you've been to churches or heard of churches where it's all like older folks, right? And you hear that the church is shrinking, excuse me, as people get older and they're not necessarily bringing younger people in and that kind of thing. I believe that that's why God needs why he calls church planters. Because there's something that happens in a church plant that's fresh and new, and it can kind of, it's not controlled by the tradition and all that kind of stuff that kind of piles on top of itself as churches age, if you know what I mean. And so that's why I believe that most church planters are apostles. Now, I'll be honest, that was not my gifting. And so God had to bring some people alongside of us that had the apostolic gifting to begin this church we call the Vineyard, right? And then there's the pastoral gifting. The pastoral gifting is walking others through life. It's shepherd. It's a shepherd, right? Guiding the sheep and leading them closer to the heart of God in very practical ways. Closer to the heart of God. The next one is the evangelical calling. And we all understand evangelicals. We all understand, we've all been told that we all are supposed to be evangelicals, right? We're all supposed to share the good news of the gospel of the kingdom. But there are certain people that have a special calling that they are able to convince people of their need for Jesus. And I am so jealous of that gifting. The people that can just walk up to people. I think they also tend to have the gift of gab, perhaps. So maybe, all the giftings have their negative side too, right? Or their imbalances. If we don't have all of these things operating, we can have an imbalance too. So they're natural at inviting, at sharing, and talking. Then we have teachers. Teachers help people to understand the scripture and the correct doctrine. And I would say that Scott is probably a teacher. I don't know if he would call himself that, but I will tell you that when I need to know something about the scriptures, I can go to Scott. You guys have probably experienced that yourselves. You go to Scott and he will tell you what the scriptures say about that topic. And he can define it, outline it, and really express. Now, he's so careful to share the scriptures without giving his opinion on it too, and I just love that. I mean, he does, but he's always careful to say, this is what I think that means. It's beautiful. So, then, of course, the prophet. The prophet is the gifting and the role that brings a fresh word of encouragement, confirmation, and edification from the Lord for the church or for individuals. And they're the ones with spiritual insight, right? They see beyond what a lot of us will see. Sometimes prophets will have more dreams and visions and that kind of thing. They tend to be more, we would call them more spiritual, I would say, right? And so those are kind of the broader areas that are needed within the church as a whole. And I'm telling you all this to kind of lead to a big question. It's kind of the age-old question, right? And that is, are leaders born or are leaders made? And that's kind of what I want to address today. In other words, how does a leader, and especially someone who's needed for spiritual ministry in God's kingdom, how do you become a leader? And I see several ways in God's kingdom that people have become leaders. So some from the scriptures, some that I've seen just personally. You guys might have some others, so I'll just kind of leave some open-ended here after I kind of share what I see, and you guys can share as well, even your own story. How have you been used in leadership in the kingdom? But the first one is need. And in Acts chapter 6, there's this story about, this is kind of when the church is just starting, right? It's getting off the ground. And you've got the 12 apostles, or the 12 kind of leaders of the church, who now are taking on a different role. Because once you start getting multiplication happening, you can't do the same things that you did before and expect the same results. So one of the things that the 12 were doing was they were involved in a feeding ministry. And it became apparent that they had to figure out a way to move out of the feeding ministry so that they could continue to focus on, it says, prayer and ministry of the word.